He's lost a lot of weight.
Yeah. It's the stress from working with you guys.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Sergeant Aaron Rode, Media Relations Officer for the Vancouver Police Department. Rode is spelled R-O-E-D. The Vancouver Police Department believes compelling circumstances exist to warn the public about a high-risk sexual offender, Brian Abrosimo, who is now living in Vancouver. Brian Abrosimo is a 57-year-old white man who is 5'7", 240 pounds with hazel eyes. He has a shaved gray hair. It looks bald, but he does have gray hair, as well as a gray mustache and goatee. Abrosimo poses a risk of significant harm to adolescent and adult women, including strangers and acquaintances. Abrosimo will be living at a halfway house in the city of Vancouver, but will have the ability to go anywhere within the city which abide by his conditions of release. Abrosimo is a two-time federal offender, serving a 14-year and 4-month sentence for sexual assault, kidnapping, unlawful confinement, assault with a weapon, sexual assault with a weapon, and forcible confinement. His sentence started in 2006, and a 10-year long-term supervision order will start when his custodial sentence ends in October of 2020. He will be bound by the terms of his statutory release, which include the following conditions. I am going to state them. I know I released them in the media release, but for the people online, need to be aware of what his conditions are so that you can notify police if he goes against them. He is not to consume or purchase alcohol. He's not to consume, purchase, or possess drugs other than prescribed medication and over-the-counter drugs taken as recommended by a manufacturer. He's not to associate with any person known to be involved in criminal activity or substance misuse. He has to immediately report all intimate sexual and non-sexual relationships and friendships with females to his parole supervisor. He's not to be in the presence of any female children under the age of 18 unless accompanied by a responsible adult familiar with his criminal history and who has previously been approved in writing by his parole supervisor. He's not to be in or near or around places where children under the age of 18 are likely to congregate, such as elementary and secondary schools, parks, swimming pools, and recreational centers, unless accompanied by an adult previously approved by his parole supervisor. He is not to have any direct or indirect contact with the victims or members of the victims' families. He also has a geographic restriction where he's not allowed to be in Abbotsford, Langley, or on Vancouver Island. Anyone sees or knows of Abrosimo violating any of these conditions is asked to call 911 immediately. The Vancouver Police Department does not want to be alarmist or strike fear into the community. We just feel, with his violent criminal past, people living in Vancouver need to know that he will be residing in and around them. Abrosimo will be monitored by a parole supervisor, and he's also being monitored by an electronic bracelet, which does monitor his activity. Is there any questions?
Sergeant, how would you characterize Abrosimo's crimes that he's convicted of committing?
Abrosimo's crimes were violent. This is why we are taking the steps to notify and warn the public that he will be living in Vancouver.
When you say there's a, quote, risk of significant harm, what specifically leads you to make that determination?
After reviewing his status while he was in custody and he is being released, officers with the Vancouver Police Department have spoken with his parole officer and made the judgment that we do need to notify people living in Vancouver that a violent sex offender will be living in around them. He does have the conditions which were outlined. If he does go against any of those conditions, we're asking anybody who notices this to call 911 immediately
Or people who may encounter him on the streets, and you say you don't want to be alarmist or strike fear, but he's committed some pretty horrific crimes, including kidnapping an 11-year-old girl and assaulting her. What would you advise them? What do you advise the people of Vancouver?
We want people to be aware of who he is, what he looks like, and what his criminal past was. We want you to be safe in the city of Vancouver, so this is why we're notifying you that a violent sexual offender is living in the city of Vancouver. We don't want you to approach this person, but if he is going against any of his conditions, please call 911 immediately.
And in terms of keeping an eye on him, I know you can't talk specific police protocols, but in terms of resources devoted to making sure he doesn't violate these conditions, what does Vancouver Police do?
We're not talking about deployment levels on how we deploy our officers in the city of Vancouver. He does have to speak with a parole supervisor while he's out, and he is being monitored by an electronic bracelet.
Worries about, last question, worries about violence, that he's potentially dangerous. We said significant harm. Is he a threat, so to speak? What words would you use?
Well, putting out a public warning is something that we can't overdo. When someone poses a risk to randomly victimize the public, we may issue a public warning. This is what we feel we need to do right now. There is a risk to the public with this individual being out, living amongst them, and going about his days. We want people to be aware of who he is, what he looks like, and what he's done in the past. His criminal history was violent against innocent victims. We don't want anybody else to be a victim of his crimes. So please, if you do see him going against any of his conditions, please call 911 immediately. Thank you.
Can you stop me before I ask you?